Well, here's a story. Here's an equation that keeps working. Here's an economic equation that keeps working. It only took about 200 years after these big city-states emerged for the first economists to apply this theory at scale. And the theory goes like this. Here's an economic theory for you. If I put $1 million in an open bed truck and drive it to the middle of Times Square and park it there and leave it, what's going to happen?
It's going to get raided.
Right? How long until somebody takes it, right? Do you even feel bad that someone would have their $1 million? Like, I don't feel bad. Like, if someone put $1 million on the street and then walked away, I'd be like, why did you do something so dumb? How could you not expect that to be rated? Okay, so that there's what's the calculus that's going on in people's brains when they see that $1 million? It's an economic equation.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back 5,500 years. We're in the Eurasian continent. Sapiens are peak predators. We've dominated everything. And then a couple sapiens decide to park rich, fertile, irrigated land in the middle of this massive continent filled with starving peak predators. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Right? Okay, so here's a lesson from some of history's most famous economists, and I'm going to refer to all military conquerors as economists. So we stop pretending like warfare is mutually exclusive to economics. Like, your economy is irrelevant if it can't survive. And it's like cringe for me to see economists act like there was ever a society that existed outside the reach of warfare. And so many economic theories take peace for granted, or they assume peace exists for their equations to work. So from now on, I'm calling military conquerors economists. The lesson is the return on investment of capturing your monetized territory increases if you don't put up a fight, if you don't put up any defense, right? That's why someone's going to take your $1 million if you just leave it sitting there. If there's nothing stopping you, your return on investment is practically infinity. So if your civilization, whatever you developed in your irrigated land, your city-state, doesn't have unity of effort, puts up less of a fight, then you're going to get an economist come to your doorstep. Okay, so economics is trying to find math models which accurately describe reality. This one accurately describes reality. This has been consistent for 5,500 years. It's one of the few economic equations that keeps working. The ROI of attacking you increases if you don't defend yourself. The more monetary property you create and the less you defend it, the higher the ROI for a third party to come and take it. In other words, agrarian societies, this act of irrigation, the creation of city-states, creates a giant honeypot security problem. Agriculture takes a lot of time and work to set up, and it produces a lot of value, and it's really easy to take if you don't defend it. So almost as soon as these city-states emerged 5,500 years ago, the first big economist pops up, Sargon, and he figures it out. He can go around and capture these city-states to create his empire, the world's first empire, because these people aren't defending their stuff. So why wouldn't you? And so this gets back to what we talked about earlier. If you have an agrarian society, if you have this big pot of money in the middle of a giant continent of peak predators, there's 3 ways to respond to the honeypot problem. The first one is trust your neighbor. Do nothing, accept the risk, and trust that your starving, resentful, greedy, and power-hungry neighbors are just going to let you continue to have your thing, right? Put your $1 million, park it in the middle of Times Square, and see how that works out for you. I would argue that's not something Bitcoiners value very much, that trust-based strategy. So your second option is to defend it yourself. Okay, to resort back to the law of nature. Remember, property is only yours insofar as you can defend it as yours. But there's a problem with that. Can you guess what the problem is? There's a challenge with that.
I would assume it's very expensive to defend your property as yours and would also distract you from your other economic occupations.
Exactly. So it's hard to defend your farm if you're too busy farming. Like, ain't nobody got time to fight any wars. I got crops to grow.
Yeah.
Right? And then to your other point, it could be expensive, right? It's hard for you to defend your farm if your resentful, greedy, power-hungry, starving neighbor has 10,000 soldiers at the edge of your farm. So that's you're going to have a difficult time.
Yeah.
So what's the third option? Is you pay, we'll call them fees, to power projectors to defend you. So this is where we should have our first thought experiment. Is it voluntary to pay those fees to power projectors to defend you? You have three options. You can trust, you can defend, you can pay fees. What you don't have the option is you don't get to unsubscribe from the power projection protocol. Mm-hmm. You can't stop. You can't go and volunteer not to have your stuff taken. That's not how this works. All of these are reactions to our decisions that you have to make in response to a threat. So you are being coerced by the law of nature, the threat that exists out there. You've got a lot of mean neighbors out there. You can trust, you can defend yourself on your own. You can pay fees to power projectors to defend you. If you don't pay fees to people to defend you, you'll find yourself defenseless unless you can do it yourself. And so I bring this up because we need to understand that with the development of militaries, with the development of warfares, there was a lot of points where new Schelling points emerged. And the Schelling point that emerged with these early city-states was that you pay fees to your power projectors, your kinetic power projectors in this case, your soldiers, to defend your property, to defend your economy. If you need that defense, you don't get the option to not need defense. You have to have it. If you need defense, but you don't pay for it, you'll still pay for it, but you won't have it. So in my opinion, you could argue it either way. I could say, yeah, it is voluntary. If you don't want to pay your fees to your defenders to defend you, then defend yourself or trust your neighbor. Good luck. See how well that works out. Or I think, and you could also argue it is involuntary because, like I said earlier, you're coerced by the threat. So like, if someone builds if you have a house and someone builds a train track that leads straight into your house and then puts a train on it pointing at your house and then turns it on full steam, headed straight at your house, is it voluntary? Are you leaving your house because it's voluntary, or are you leaving your house because there's a threat, the imminent threat that you have to respond to? Like, I don't think there's anyone in the world who would want to pay fees to power projectors if it were strictly voluntary, if it were strictly optional.